Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Then, too, I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This, too, is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This, too, I say, is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there's nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life God has given them under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom, and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it.
Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant, warns the young and pious Isabella in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. She is speaking, of course, to Vienna's chief constable, Angelo, who holds her brother Claudio's life in his hands. Claudio has been sentenced to death for the crime of impregnating his fiancée Juliet before their marriage. And so Angelo, using his unchecked power, offers to spare Claudio's life, only if Isabella, who's just starting her life out as a nun, only if Isabella agrees to sleep with him. And this was 4 centuries before we had ever heard of Jerry Springer. Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant. And I believe that Isabella's criticism of Angelo's abuse of authority echoes that of King Solomon's here in the 8th chapter of Ecclesiastes. Our teacher urges us to navigate the injustices of flawed authority with the patience and the trust in God's ultimate authority. Now, I don't know what you make of justice these days. If you're anything like most people, you probably have some serious questions about how God's justice works in this world. We live in an age where injustice seems to flourish, where the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. And we talked about this last week, where good people die young and evil people live long lives. The Talking Heads, I think, captured this nihilism when they sang about we're on a road to nowhere. Come on inside, taking that road to nowhere. We'll take that ride. Sometimes that's exactly how God's justice feels to us, like a road to nowhere that doesn't seem to lead anywhere we can understand. Well, as we continue in our series in the book of Ecclesiastes, we find ourselves face to face with one of life's most pressing questions. How do we live under imperfect or even corrupt authority? How does the Christian balance earthly justice with divine justice? Our passage today, Ecclesiastes chapter 8, takes us into Solomon's most profound reflections on wisdom and authority in the mystery of divine justice in a fallen world. Now, remember where we are in this most remarkable book. The teacher, Solomon himself, in his later years, has been giving us this unflinching examination of life under the sun, life as it appears when we try to make sense of it without reference to God. He's shown us the absolute futility of looking for meaning in pleasure or in work or in human wisdom, even in religious observance. And now he turns to perhaps the most troubling question of all. Why doesn't God's justice seem to work the way we think it should? You see, Solomon isn't writing in some ivory tower removed from the realities of political life. This is a man who wielded absolute power for 40 marvelous years, who made life and death decisions, who knew both the intoxication of authority and its burden. Heavy is the head who wears the crown. And yet here, later in life, he's reflecting not as the king, but as someone who now must live under authority, under the ultimate authority of God, yes, but also under the very real authority of earthly or temporal powers. So our passage begins in verse 1. Who is like the wise person? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard expression. Solomon begins not with the problem of injustice, but with the solution of wisdom. And he tells us something I think is remarkable, that wisdom actually changes how we look. It literally transforms our face. The Hebrew here suggests that wisdom softens the wrinkles or softens the lines of worry or anger and sort of replaces them with something settled and something peaceful. But what is this wisdom? Verse 2 gives us a clue. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Now, this might seem like an odd place to start when we're talking about justice. After all, what if the king is an unjust king? What if the authority over us is corrupt, or what if it's incompetent? But Solomon, he's making a point about the very nature of wisdom. True wisdom understands that the principle of authority itself, it comes from God, even when particular authorities fail to live up to their calling. The wise person doesn't expect perfection from earthly rulers because they understand the doctrine of human depravity. They know that all earthly authority is flawed because all human beings are flawed. And yet, the wise person also understands something else, that even imperfect authority serves God's purposes. Government may be flawed, but it's better than anarchy. Leaders may in fact be corrupt, but ordered society is better than chaos. The wise person submits, not because authority is perfect, but because God has ordained the principle of authority for our good. And then Solomon develops this in verses 3 and 4. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since a king's word is supreme, who could say to him, What are you doing? Here's the tension that wisdom, as it were, has to navigate. Solomon, he's saying, respect authority, but don't respect evil. Stay engaged, but don't be impulsive. Don't storm out of the room the second you find something that you disagree with, but also don't lend your support to what you know is wrong. Wisdom understands that working within imperfect systems calls for patience and tact and diplomacy, and yes, timing. This is precisely what Daniel from the Old Testament demonstrated. Here was a man who served under some of the most powerful and often the most corrupt rulers of the ancient world, and Daniel never once led a rebellion or called for revolution, but neither did he compromise his integrity. When authority demanded what God forbade, Daniel respectfully refused, and he accepted the consequence. But then Solomon says something crucial in verse 5. Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. The wise Christian or the wise heart knows something about timing. They know when to speak and when to be silent, when to act and when to wait, when to submit, when to resist. Sounds like another part of Ecclesiastes, right? This wisdom in regards to timing, it's so crucial because it recognizes that the purposes of God often unfold slowly or generationally, that his plans are made manifest in ways that we might not choose ourselves. The wise man or woman doesn't expect immediate solutions to complex problems. They understand that lasting change usually comes through patience and persuasion and faithfulness, and not by hasty or forceful measures. The theological foundation here is God's authority over earthly authorities. When we truly believe that God rules over all earthly rulers, then we could submit to imperfect authority without anxiety, because we know that it is God who is ultimately in control. That even when temporal authorities make bad decisions, God's purposes can never be thwarted. But you see, Solomon doesn't just leave us with a few simple platitudes about submission to authority. He immediately confronts us with the reality that makes such submissions difficult. Verse 6, for there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighed down by misery. The little phrase there, that weighed down by misery, it reminds us that living in a fallen world is often so difficult, genuinely painful it could be. The Christian will not minimize this pain. They won't pretend that trusting God's timing is easy. They acknowledge that we live in a world where injustice often prevails, where the righteous often suffer. He then moves on to the human condition, verses 7 and 8. Since no one knows the future, who could tell someone else what is to come? As no one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so no one is released from the wickedness of this life. Here the teacher is pointing towards the fundamental limitations of human knowledge and human control. We don't know the future. We can't control the timing of our death. We can't escape the reality of living in a fallen world. And you see, these limitations are not bugs in the systems, they're features. God has deliberately limited our human knowledge and our human control to prevent any earthly power from becoming absolute, and so that we'll realize our need of God and our dependence on him. And if you're anything like me who struggles with God's timing, this is actually quite liberating. It means that we don't have to figure it all out, all of God's purposes out before we trust him. It means we don't have to understand why certain things happen when they do. It's this balance between mystery and faith. God is indeed working out his purposes in history, but he doesn't always show us the how or the why. From our own limited perspective, his timing often seems wrong. It's too slow or too fast or too perplexing. But the person of wisdom learns to trust God's timing even when they can't understand it. They know that God sees the whole picture while they see just tiny paint chips. They know that God's ways are higher than their ways, his thoughts higher than their thoughts. They learn to say, as with Job, though he slay me, yet I trust in him. And this doesn't mean we become passive or fatalistic. We're still called to work for justice and to oppose evil and to better our communities. But we do so with the recognition that God's timeline may not match ours, that his methods may not be the ones that we would choose, that his purposes can be done in ways that we don't expect. And now we move to what may be the most difficult part of our text, Solomon's idea on how injustice seems to do so well on this earth. Verse 9, all this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when man lords it over others to his own heart. The Hebrew here is difficult, but the sense seems to be that Solomon has seen how power corrupts, how those in authority often use their positions to harm others rather than help them. He's seen the dark side of human nature when it's given absolute power. But then he gets more specific in verses 10 and 11. Then too I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This too is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Here's the heart of the problem that troubles so many believers. Solomon sees that wicked people often seem to prosper, but moreover, he's saying that when they walk through town, when they do these wicked things, they still receive honor and praise, and they're even buried with dignity and respect. And meanwhile, justice is delayed, and evil goes unchecked, and that leads to that practical consequence that Solomon notes in the second half in verse 11. Justice delayed, what does it do? It encourages more evil, doesn't it? When people see that crime doesn't result in swift punishment, that emboldens them to commit more crimes. But then Solomon makes one of the most important statements, I think, in the entire book in verse 12. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better for those who fear God, who are reverent before him. And notice that word, although. Solomon, he's acknowledging the reality of what he observes while still maintaining his conviction about what he knows to be true. Yes, bad people sometimes prosper and live long lives. Yes, justice often seems delayed or not even there. But despite these appearances, Solomon sticks with his belief that ultimately it will go far better for those who fear God. And this is not a statement of fact, it's a statement of faith. Solomon, he can't prove this from any empirical data. Indeed, his findings, they seem to contradict it. But he holds on to his conviction because it's grounded not in what he could see, but in what God has revealed about his character and his purposes. And the next verse, verse 13, reinforces the point. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. Again, this is not always what we see in the short term. Many wicked people live long, prosperous lives. But Solomon is looking beyond the immediate to the eternal. Then in verse 14, he sort of sums up the force and the weight of the problem. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This, too, I say, is meaningless. Here's the fundamental injustice that bothers every thoughtful person. Good people suffer while evil people prosper. And from a purely earthly perspective, it kind of makes no sense. It seems so random and so meaningless and even absurd. And this is where many people lose their faith. They look at the unfairness in this world and they figure that either God doesn't exist or he doesn't care. If God is good and powerful, then why doesn't he immediately punish evil and reward the righteous? Why do children suffer while bullies get a pass? It's what we talked about last week in chapter 7, verse 15. I've seen both of these, the righteous perishing despite their righteousness and the wicked living long lives despite their wickedness. And these are real questions that deserve honest answers. Solomon, he doesn't dismiss them. He doesn't offer easy solution. He acknowledges the full force of the problem while maintaining his faith in God's ultimate justice. He lives in the tension between what he sees and what he believes, between appearances and realities. Because God's justice is real, but it's not always visible. We live in sort of this overlap between the age of injustice and the age of perfect justice, the age of suffering, the age of glory, of faith and sight. And this means that the Christian believer will often find themselves in Solomon's position, seeing injustice while still having faith in God's justice. And this is not a failure of faith, it's the very nature of faith. Now, given all this, the reality of injustice and the mystery of God's timing and the limitations of human knowledge and understanding, how then shall we live life? Solomon's answer found in verse 15 might surprise us. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for mortals under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the day of the life God has given them under the sun. Now this, no doubt, It sounds dangerously close to escapism. Eat and drink and don't worry as the world, burns down around you. But no, Solomon, I think, wants us to have the ability of receiving God's gifts with a sense of gratitude even while we're in the midst of a fallen and a broken world. You see, the key phrase there is all the days of the life God has given them. Solomon, he's not advocating for hedonism. He's advocating for gratitude. Food, drink, work, companionship, certainly gifts from God. And they can be enjoyed. We can enjoy them when we don't understand everything about how God's providence works. It's not eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die. That's the pagan approach. It's more like eat, drink, and be grateful because God has provided these things. Now, admittedly, this may seem a strange response to the problem of injustice, but actually it's profoundly wise. Solomon is saying that we don't have to solve all the mysteries of God before we can enjoy the good things he gives us. We don't have to understand why suffering exists before we can appreciate his mercy. But this joy is not naive, nor is it superficial. Look at how Solomon qualifies it in verses 16 and 17. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all God has done. No one could comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one could discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it. Solomon has searched for understanding. He's applied his mind, observed carefully, lost sleep, trying to figure out how God's providence works. And his conclusion? No one could comprehend what goes on under the sun. And even the wisest people cannot really comprehend the full scope of God's purposes. And I think that this is both humbling and liberating at the same time. It's humbling because it reminds us of our own limitations and our dependence on God, but it's also very liberating because it frees us from the impossible burden of trying to understand everything before we trust God. The Christian learns to live within the mystery. They accept that there are indeed aspects of God's plan that remain hidden, that won't be revealed this side of eternity, that there are questions in this life that won't be answered. They find peace not in knowing all the answers, but in trusting the one who does. And this is what theologians call the incomprehensibility of God. God is knowable, but not exhaustively so. We can know certain things about God without knowing everything about God. We could trust his character without understanding all his ways. We could be confident in his justice without seeing how every injustice is resolved. But there's something even deeper here, something that takes us to the very heart of the gospel and helps us to understand how this justice really works. You see, the greatest injustice in all of human history was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. To live an innocent life and die a guilty one's death, to live a sinless life and die taking a sinner's judgment, to suffer a rebel's fate so that rebels can know the life of a real child of God. From a purely human perspective, the cross makes no sense. I mean, it seems to be the ultimate triumph of injustice over justice, of evil over good, darkness over light. If we judged God's justice purely by what happened to Jesus, we would have to conclude that God is either powerless or indifferent to injustice. But the gospel reveals that God's justice works in ways we could never have imagined. The cross wasn't the defeat of God's justice, but it was its ultimate expression. God didn't overlook sin. He didn't ignore injustice. He dealt with it fully and finally in the person of his Son. And Christ took upon himself the punishment that we deserved so that we could receive the righteousness that he is. And this means that every injustice will ultimately be addressed. Either it was addressed, it was dealt with at the cross where Christ bore the punishment for sin, or it will be dealt with at the final judgment where those who reject Christ's sacrifice will face the consequences of their own choice. God's justice is not absent or delayed. It was fully satisfied on the cross, and this changes everything about how we view present injustice. We don't have to seek immediate retribution for every evil because we know that ultimate justice has already been secured. We don't have to despair when the wicked prosper because we know that their prosperity is temporary. And moreover, the gospel gives us hope not just for justice, but for mercy. Because Christ has borne the punishment for sin, God could show mercy to repentant sinners without compromising his justice. The worst criminal can be forgiven. The most corrupt politician can be redeemed. The most violent oppressor can be transformed. God's justice makes this possible. So what's the application? Well, first off, we need to develop what we might call a gospel perspective on justice. And this means understanding that ultimate justice has already been taken care of at the cross, and that our current injustices, they're real, but they're temporary, and that our true hope is not in achieving ideal justice in this world, but in the ideal justice that Christ will establish when he returns. Secondly, we ought to practice patience with God's timing. It doesn't mean becoming indifferent to it, but it does mean that recognizing that God's purposes often unfold slowly over generations and through means we might not choose. And this is particularly important in our instant gratification culture, where we expect immediate results and quick solutions to complex problems. God operates on a different timeline than our preferences, and learning to trust his timing is critical to maintaining our faith over time. Third, we must live within the divine mystery of Christian faith without losing our hope. You realize, right, that there are countless aspects of regarding God's will that we will never fully understand on this side of eternity. Questions that won't be answered, things that won't be resolved, suffering that won't make sense until we see Christ face to face. But mystery is not the enemy of faith. It's the context which faith operates. If we understood everything about how God works, then presumably we wouldn't need faith. And then finally, we ought to practice what Solomon refers to as eat, drink, and be glad. The ability to receive God's gifts with gratitude, even in the midst of a broken world. We don't have to solve all the mysteries of life before we could enjoy the blessings that God gives us. And just let me close with this. God's justice is real even when it's hidden, just as Christ's victory over evil is certain even when evil seems to be winning. But the story is not over. In the final chapter, will reveal the perfect wisdom of his divine plan. Every tear will be wiped away. Every injustice will be corrected. Every wrong will be made right when Christ returns. Until that day, we live as a people of hope in a world that often seems hopeless. We engage in this world while remembering that our true citizenship is in the next. And I suppose our challenge is this: living in faith while being surrounded by mystery. And that requires spiritual maturity. It's much easier to want simple answers than to trust God with complex questions, or demand immediate justice rather than wait patiently for ultimate justice. But God calls us to a mature faith, a faith that can trust him even when we can't see him. And this kind of faith doesn't come naturally, not at all. It needs to be cultivated through things like prayer and reading our Bibles and worship and fellowship. Ladies and gentlemen, we serve a God whose ways are higher than our ways, whose thoughts are higher than our thoughts, whose justice is perfect, even when we can't see it. He has demonstrated his character at the cross, where perfect justice and perfect mercy met in the person of his Son. And he will vindicate that character when Christ returns to judge the living and the dead and to establish his kingdom on earth. Until that day, may we live as Solomon lived, with eyes wide open to the realities of injustice, but with hearts fixed firmly on the certainties of our faith. Would you pray? Father, we thank you that the Bible has an honesty and a clarity to it that helps the limited capacity of our minds to grapple with the big questions of life. And yet, in the dimness of our sight and in the cloudiness of your purpose, may we rest secure, convinced, as was our teacher, King Solomon, that all in all, our Heavenly Father knows what he's doing, knows what's best, and loves us with an everlasting love. Thank you. In Christ's name, amen.